EdTech Monday Africa is brought to you by the Mastercard Foundation's Center for Innovative Teaching and Learning in ICT and Mastercard Foundation's Young Africa Works.
Welcome to this month's special edition of EdTech Monday Africa, featuring segments from the Ministerial Forum on harnessing technology to build resilient education systems. I'm Julie Gishuru, and it's a pleasure to be with you. Last month, the Mastercard Foundation Center for Innovative Teaching and Learning in ICT was honored to host ministers, deputy ministers, their technical advisors, education development partners, technology hubs, EdTech organizations and experts, as well as teachers and young people from different parts of the continent. Now, this event was the second of its kind, and it provided a unique opportunity to share the outcomes of the first Ministerial Forum held in Botswana in August 2019. And it enabled stakeholders to really dive into how technology can help build back better, build stronger and more resilient education systems. The lead for the Mastercard Foundation Center of Innovative Teaching and Learning in ICT, Suraj Shah, held conversations with some of the delegates at the forum. Let's hear what they had to say.
Thank you, Julie. Indeed, it has been a very informative 1.5 days. But I also had the opportunity to share a few minutes with ministers, education stakeholders, as well as teachers and young people to discuss what the future of education looks like. Welcome, Deputy Minister for Department of Basic Education, Regina Mahaule. Thank you so much for attending our Ministerial Forum. It's an honor to have you and hear your thoughts around resilient education systems. During COVID, I think it is no surprise to anyone how learners missed out on continuous learning, how teachers also are disillusioned with how they would continue with learning. We all have learned a lot of lessons in the loss of learning that we experience. But some of the things we've heard South Africa put in place to combat similar situations in the future, putting in resilient education systems. Would like to hear from you. What has yourself and your government, how are you planning? It need not be right now, but how are you planning to bring about resilient education systems so that we minimize the loss of learning due to situations like these?
Thank you very much. And I really appreciate this opportunity to come and represent my country, South Africa, and the Department of Basic Education. When we speak about resilience is a word that has always been spoken, especially in the education systems in the whole world. So it was aiming at responding to any kind of pandemic that may come. So COVID-19 taught us it's a pandemic that affected the whole world and all nations, all countries. And when you look at the structure of any nation and country, it differs from one to another. And even in the same country, like our country, South Africa, we are not the same. It's like we're two countries in one. There's an urban South Africa and a deep rural South Africa, where some learners during the hard lockdown did not have any contact with anyone. They were just at home. And it means learning and teaching stopped, and there was no learning whatsoever. But those that are living in urban areas where there's much infrastructure on ICT, they were able to communicate with their teachers. But we cannot stand and look at them and say, no, now there's a disparity, we allow it to grow. When they came back, as the Department of Basic Education, we said, no, we need to recover the work lost. And the recovery plan covered all learners, not to say those ones who were a bit advantaged then must move up, and when the other ones must remain behind. No, we set up a trimmed annual teaching plans. We trimmed them to say when we assess them, we want to assess them on the work that they have done. And also, the trimming is not something that is forever. It's a trimming that is looking at the period of the pandemic. We said because we don't know when the pandemic will end, but we took it up to 2024. At the same time, we are assessing.
How do you see a role for technology in your new vision to fast track some of the objectives you have placed?
Technology is the way to go. We were talking and discussing ICT and a fourth industrial revolution as something that is behind four mountains. But the pandemic, COVID-19, taught us to move with speed. And now, even in the deep rural areas, everybody speaks ICT. So it is very important because the COVID-19 taught us that the old way of sitting in a class and a teacher sitting in front there, it looks like it's an anomaly. What is normal now? It's to connect on a gadget, speak from wherever I am, and teacher communicating with learners from wherever they are. So we are doing this. There are, of course, policies in place because these policies came before COVID-19. And at that time, that's when I say we're still looking at it as it's beyond the river. It must first cross the river and come. So the policies were enacted in 2012, 2013, until 2016. But they were looking at the governance in general. So now as basic education, we have combined all the service providers of ICT. We sat down with them, we are working with them, because the main issue is connectivity. If we get all our rural schools connected, then it means now the country will flow as one. At the same time, if you remember what our president said on the State of the Nation address, he spoke about making sure that each and every household gets data. And that, to me, it's a solution. It's an everlasting solution, though people must learn that data is not cheap and it doesn't come free. But because of the challenges brought by COVID-19, that many people lost jobs and this, so that's why government is also thinking of compensating each and every household. It's a thing that we're still going to make a study, but President wants us to move in speed. Because when you connect schools and give teachers data, learners don't have data. When they are at home, it means there will be no communication between the teacher and the child, especially the rural ones. Yeah. So now if we make sure that every household has data, then you have solved the problem. What we are doing as a department is to bring everybody together, that let's work together. We don't want that some people are supporting this school and you find a double dumping. This service provider is supporting the same school, the other one comes support the same school. Then we say, come work with us. We know our priorities. We know the schools that need support and the nature of the support. So that's why we say technology is very critical in the strategy that we are using to bring back learning and teaching in its fullest capacity.
Thank you. Wow, that is amazing. I believe you're one of the leaders in not only setting the policy, but also working with the private sector and saying, if you want to succeed and scale, then work with us. Fantastic. I wish you all the best. And we look forward to having more discussions with you in the forum as well. Yes. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And the opportunities to interview more and more people from a policy angle keep continuing. Right now, I'm seated in front of the Deputy Minister for Education, Zimbabwe, the Honorable Edgar Moyo. Honorable Moyo, welcome to our Ministerial Forum. I hope you've had the discussions so far have been helpful and useful for you and informative. For this particular section of EdTech Monday, we want to talk about, everyone has discussed the havoc created by the pandemic in education. Students went home, teachers went home, learning was at a loss. And a lot of countries have now started putting in place measurements, not just to overcome COVID, but also how should we not get caught out by this in the future. It could be pandemic, it could be the other reasons, political reasons, or climate, or worse climate reasons where students don't go to school. But what are your opinions around what can be done to create more resilient education systems? And if you see a role for technology playing in that.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me in this discussion. It gives us an opportunity really to interact with the public and also say out what we are doing in our different countries to come up with resilient education systems. For Zimbabwe, education has remained a very important pillar in the human capital development trajectory of the country. And for that reason, we put in a lot of effort to ensure that education continues, even in difficult times. And as you rightfully put it, in the terms of pandemics or political instabilities, technology has become a very important bridge to ensure that learning continues. Now, in terms of the strategies in Zimbabwe, in continuing education even during difficult times, we have come up with strategies built around different pillars. And one of the key pillars is the differentiated education approach, where we are looking at individual capabilities of our children to ensure that even the disabled are catered for, even those of difficult learning abilities are also taken care of. And we do this in all different levels of our education system, both in primary and secondary education. So this ensures that even if someone had a disability, even if someone had a difficulty, education continues. The other important area is that of research and innovation. We appreciate that we have to continuously improve whatever we're doing, be it at school, be it outside school. And therefore research becomes important so that whatever decisions we come up, they are evidence-based. And so this is a very important pillar that we have recently strengthened, and we've come up with a unique department in the ministry which deals with research and innovation. We've also encouraged our schools to come up with innovation hubs so that our children, wherever they are, if they identify problems in their communities, our system should respond to those problems by coming up with solutions. We don't want people who will always describe problems, but we want people who are going to provide solutions to those problems. And the other very important pillar is digital learning and teaching. And this, like I said earlier on, is the bridge that connects the school and the learner. We appreciate that many a time we have disasters that occur, be they through weather elements, be they through conflicts and so forth. And we are always ready for that. And we are upscaling our technology outlay in the system. And this outlay, this technology thrust, we also know that most of our teachers are not very much confident in it, and we continuously train them so that in whatever they are doing in terms of technology, they are confident and they don't seem to exit the ministry or the education service because they are afraid of technology. So I want to give them the necessary confidence. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I think all your points are very much what I have in mind. Exams need to be reviewed. You cannot be punishing someone on the day of that. Have they really done well throughout the year? Yeah. And your pillars are very aligned. I'm sure our readers will find that very useful. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
I welcome the Deputy Minister for Education, Sierra Leone, Honorable Emily Gogra. Welcome to our show. Thank you so much for attending the Ministerial Forum. The panel you've just completed was very powerful, and everyone was, I think, rapturous in what you said. Honorable Minister, we've COVID, as we've all discussed, has disrupted learning, has disrupted the way schooling was initially thought about. And we're hearing some really good stories about how Sierra Leone is combating that loss of learning and creating more resilient systems so that we don't get caught out similar things or similar disruptions in the future. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Oh, thank you very much. It's a privilege being here today and learning from my colleague ministers in the various regions. Really, in Sierra Leone, it was a lot, but we survived it through the hard work of our Honorable Deputy Minister, David Senge, in collaboration with partners who are working with us in education, and also the Ministry of Basic and Senior Secondary Education. When the COVID struck, we are all shocked. And schools closed down for a short time, and we thought of it and then diverge to meet the children in their homes. How did we do that? We do that through radio programs. We have a radio station at our own ministry, the broadcasting unit, and we got different teachers to be teaching these subjects. And partners helped in the delivery of these lessons. Well, we thought it wise. We said, let us form a team so that our children come back to school. That is why the whole world admired us. We said we're going to keep the rules. Keeping the rules is the most important in COVID or even in outbreak of diseases. So we tried as much as possible to get our schools back in a very short time, just 3 months, and they were back in school. They had the mask on. We have the areas of wash, the wash facilities. We tried as much, and the spacing. We divided the children to go in bits in school according to the shift system. We resolved. We never wanted it, but we resolved going back to the shift system. Moving on and on, they started teaching, but we said back home again, let the children use the radios. This is another important tech that they use. Then moving on again, we said let them use SMS. And we had the dictionary, wherein we use the telecommunication units like AfriCell and Orange. And when they even sat to the exam, which other countries thought it was impossible, but for us with such teaching with the radio, the main radio at the ministry, then the radios at home that the different partners supplied the children, we said, let us conduct the national exam. And it was unbelievable. Of all the years, 2021, we got massive good results. A lot of children, about 21% of them, went to university more than the previous years. And I support the EdTech. I am grateful to Mastercard Foundation. But moving on, we need sustainability. And that is what my government is always seeking, the human development and sustainability of programs. Because we believe in one of our policies, the radical inclusion. We include those in the rural areas. We include those who are disabled. We include children despite the tribe. And we include children who sometimes we feel cannot contribute. But if they are among their peers, they do give meaningful contributions. This is how we have survived the COVID-19, and we are progressing. We are having even the results checker, and our data collection is being done by tech. And from there, we are having meaningful decisions that lead us to equitable distribution of the resources.
Thank you so much. That is a very inspiring strategy and implementation plan. Thank you very much, and we will continue these discussions.
Thank you very
this.
much.
Thank you. So now we shift our focus to ask a slightly different question on the role that other education stakeholders will play in supporting resilient education systems. I have with me Bosun Tijani, CEO and founder of CC Hub Nigeria. Bosun, welcome. I hope you found the last day and a half informative. We certainly got a lot of information from how CC Hub and other technology hubs are working with education technology experts.
Thank you.
Bosun, the subject has been harnessing technology to create resilient education systems. How can we flip this in a different way? How does education itself need to evolve so that learners can continuously access learning even without classrooms?
It's an interesting question, Suraj, and one that we, even as a technologist, we need to be a lot more inclusive around how we think about what the answer to that question would be. Because we all know that the demands on education are constantly evolving. It's one of those things I call wicked problems, right? Because the society is growing and changing really rapidly. Digital technology is changing how we live as people, but also most importantly is actually changing the skill set that people need to thrive and participate in economies today. And the challenge in that for education is the need for education to constantly be adaptive. And you know, because of the peculiarity of what education is meant to do, which is to help groom productive people, the educationists and stakeholders are typically very protective of the processes that is involved in how we conceptualize, whether it's curriculum, how we deliver this content, even how we train teachers, such that it takes so much effort for any of those things to change. But in a world that is moving so fast, the education system in itself is so backward and struggling to catch up. So I think it's a pain, that we all need to recognize. I don't think it's a reason to talk down on the stakeholders. I think it's just important for both the technologies, but also the innovators and the traditional education stakeholders to understand and appreciate this challenge. Then ask ourselves, what systems can we put in place that would help education system collect more data around the changing requirements for education, and how that changing requirement can influence the policies we put in place, but also how we deliver education system. I think in my mind, that's the biggest pain from the change that we're witnessing, that we also need to ensure that beyond building these new fancy technologies, that change needs to be in place.
Yeah. And you referred to it as well. I think one of the crucial cogs in that change is the teachers. Absolutely. And how they evolve. Absolutely. What would be the role of an ideal teacher if the education systems were evolved? And how do we build their capacity?
It's an interesting question. I think building their capacity is twofold. It's not really just exposing them to the opportunity to be able to use technologies to teach, but I think it's also a mindset issue, and that was spoken a lot at this gathering. The mindset issue needs to move to a point where, as a teacher, you recognize that the world is moving fast, and there's a need for you to be able to understand how to access information, how to process information, and how to take informed decision from what you've processed. And once we can put a teacher in that position, they then become facilitators of learning. But what you need to know as a teacher is how to guide a learner to discover. I think we'll start to see a better movement in education where the teachers are not threatened by technologies because they see their role as only being a facilitator and not all-knowing.
So the teacher needs to adapt, change, and
absolutely
move with technology. Speaking of technologies, are technologies evolving, or how should technologies evolve such that they enable access where previously they were, to learners who were previously excluded, they couldn't afford it? Are technologies evolving, and What would be your kind of idea of the best way to sort of enable everyone to have access to?
To have access, I think perhaps first side is there is role for those who are thinking for society and technologies, and there's not that many of those people. By nature, technologies are more futuristic, right? They're pushing for the next frontier. And most of the time, the next frontier is not inclusive, because the next frontier is moving away from the status quo. And if you're moving away from the status quo, you're not going to be, not everyone will be able to afford it. Good example, we're going to the space to live. At the minute, I don't think everyone on Earth will be able to afford to do that in probably 200 years' time, but some people will be able to. And I think that's the challenge with technology. As technology is disrupting education, the bulk of it is not introspective enough to say, can we be building solutions that drives inclusivity? So can we be building technologies that become a lot less expensive? Can we be using smart technologies to deliver offline, learning? Can we be pushing internet to the point where it's readily available to everyone? Because until we do that, what we're going to be doing, which comes back to the wicked problem analogy, is we're going to continue to be creating gaps. We want to move content online so that it becomes personalized. People can, access it anywhere in the world without being in a classroom, right? But at the same time, we're building this content to be real time, which means they have to be powered by the internet. So we're making access for those who have, but excluding those who don't. So as we plug the gap on one hand, we're creating more gaps on the other hand. So we're talking about millions of kids out of schools, but we're moving education to a point where even those who can go to school now cannot access quality content because they don't have access to internet. So we're fixing one problem, but creating another problem. So there's a need for more thinking and perhaps support for those who are building alternative technology solutions that can cater for those, whether you want to call them at the bottom of the pyramid or in locations where access is a problem.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks
very much.
My pleasure.
Bosun Tejani, soon to be called Dr. Bosun Tejani.
Thank you.
It's a real pleasure. Thank you. And much as we've heard from the policymakers around resilient education systems, can we pause and take a moment to what did the learners go through? What was their experience? What are they thinking that should be done in the future? Today, I am interviewing Deborah Kansime, a scholar at ALU here in Rwanda. Welcome, Deborah. Thank you for your contributions in the panels earlier at the Ministerial Forum. I hope you also got some insight into what others are doing.
Yes, I did.
Deborah, you've done a really good research during COVID around the disruption of learning. But what was your experience? What happened to you? What did you go through when learning was disrupted?
Okay, at the moment I was taking a course in leadership, and it was in person. When the pandemic hit and we went to lockdown, we had to stop learning, and unfortunately we didn't even resume. So after that, I got admitted to ALU, and one of the systems was to introduce online learning because of the pandemic. So we studied online, and I was living in the residence at the moment, so it wasn't lonely as I was around other people, and we faced challenges, but seeing other people facing the same challenge was a relief. But I understand some of the people who are at home faced more challenges than we did, because you get disconnected, all those problems that come with online learning, and you have to endure it alone. So it kind of like excluding and depressing. So that I understand in their perspective, but mine wasn't as bad because I was living with other people.
Right. So what I'm hearing from you is not just about the loss of learning, but even the social contact, etc., was reduced or almost came to zero, which kind of could lead to, depression or mental health issues in the young people. Going forward, and Deborah, this last 2 years was a pandemic. maybe in the future we would have adverse weather or maybe political unsettlement or strife could keep people, students, learners, teachers away from learning as we see it right now, in bricks and mortar kind of environment. If you had the ability to change or bring in something very different or radical, what would be your recommendations? How would we combat this in the future?
Thank you so much for that question. As you mentioned, I did research on the pandemic and very many other things. I am a global challenges student, so the world is always going to face challenges. There are disasters that are going to happen. We don't want them to happen, but then sometimes they're inevitable, and we have to have an education system that will be able to sustain us even in those circumstances. So I would say that's when the advantages of online learning would come in, because that system can keep you in education regardless of what is going on in the world. So I'd say that we should get prepared beforehand, because we don't know what the future holds, but we can do what we can when we can, and possibly this will sustain us in the future.
Yeah. Deborah, do you have friends or young people that you have the advantage of accessing ICT technology and the tools to learn online, but do you know of young people like yourself who can't? And what would they do in the future if you could make changes to things?
Yes, and that is why for some people online learning did not work out because of lack of equipment. Well, my school and the people who provide fund, personally I am a Mastercard Foundation scholar, so for us we had a support system during the pandemic, people who provided laptops, who provided internet. So we did not lack that, but I also have friends who didn't have the privilege to have all those things during the pandemic. So they lacked those things, and in turn, they did not follow through the online learning. So the disruptions that came can still come. So in preparing ourselves for online learning, we have to also have a system that will provide for those people. And as I mentioned, there are some people who can provide funds. We as scholars, as students, we can also think in a big picture of sustaining ourselves. In as much as we could get funds, we also have to think, what if you don't get funds? You can save as you approach that, and also be able to provide for yourself.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So here we are, having completed a really successful 1.5 days of the Ministerial Forum, which was a pre-event to the ELearning Africa Conference 2022 held here in Kigali Convention Center. The organizers of ELearning Africa have told me that this year it's been a record turnout, and that's not surprising because 2 years we kind of closed everything down because of the pandemic. And one of the things that the pandemic did was it brought to the limelight and global focus all things e-learning. How do we integrate technology in education so that our students, our teachers continue with their education? I'm very, very hopeful that we will interview some amazing young people, some teachers, some companies that will tell us their experience through the pandemic and what they are doing to mitigate the loss of learning.
I think now the pandemic has really created an atmosphere where governments and education sector has to embrace technology, and there is need now to dig deeper into new technological tools like digitalizing of content, providing online platforms where learners can learn even when they are very far. So I think as teachers, as the education sector, we need now to invest more in ICT. We need to invest more in training teachers on how to use the ICT tools.
So I really think we do so much in terms of creating startups and solutions that are technically based in order to gain access. But personally, for me, I feel like the focus should be on how to deliver the content. I would like to propose that we look at how the teachers are delivering the content as opposed to what platform they're using. Because if the platforms are there, the platforms are always there. If the platform is there, but the means to engage students is not there, the students simply won't learn, and it'll become, education is simply becoming an aspect of money making as opposed to actually teaching, which loses the essence of why you want to come to school in the first place. We want to bring the school to the students using these EdTech solutions. We want them to be engaged, to learn. So I think we should look at pedagogy and the approach of how we're delivering this content. So let's step out of amazing solutions that are doing each other and look intrinsically at how can we actually push learning in a way that makes them not just engaged, not just having fun, but also aware that there's more that they can gain from learning, and there's more of an impact that they can make.
During COVID, you remember very well, we had lockdown for 2 years in Uganda. So what we did, we had the teachers on the ground, we trained them how to use these tablets. So what we did with the teachers, we could move from village to village, helping these learners to read with their parents these tablets. And because we have been dealing with the remote schools, whereby we have been using solar power because there is no power and there is no internet, and these tablets are loaded. If we could continue with this project, I think it would be a good idea, so that maybe when COVID, maybe another pandemic break out, we can continue with the digital skills in the villages.
What amazing interviews we've had. We've heard from policymakers, we've heard from teachers, we've heard from youth, we've heard from young people. And some of the emerging ideas around creating resilient education systems have been, first and foremost, policy. It was quite heartening to know that many of the governments we interviewed had already put very, very good policies in place, such that when the pandemic hit, it was simply a matter of realizing and implementing and fast-tracking those policies to ensure that e-learning started at a faster pace, that students were reached, and all sorts of broadcast medias were used, radios, TV, etc., to ensure and minimize the loss of learning for these learners. One other thing that emerged time and time again was the continuous teacher professional development and ensuring that teachers adapt to digital learning and digital literacy. It's one thing to know how to use technology, but it will require teachers a completely different set of skills to actually migrate to an online learning platform or provide distance learning, e-learning. Curriculum was also considered to be changing. A lot of times the curriculum was either less time-bound or was actually reduced to enable faster learning and still getting the right skills in place. But what really struck me was the voice of a young woman who actually said that, why don't we try peer-to-peer learning amongst youth? Train other youth, to train teachers, to train learners on how to use technology and learn faster without classrooms using technology. I want now to pass on to Joseph Sengimana, head of the Center of Innovative Teaching and Learning at Mastercard Foundation, to give us his view of the overall Ministerial Forum and some of the things we've learned from there.
The forum, the Ministerial Forum for Harnessing Technology to Improve Learning across the continent, brought together education stakeholders. It provided an opportunity for them to share their experiences, particularly what they went through in order to guarantee continuous learning during the pandemic. It also provided them the opportunity to listen to the CITL roadmap and provide feedback so that we can work together towards a common objective. Some of the things that we realize is that there is a generalized will to really incorporate technology into education. Pre-COVID, there were an approach to look at technology as an add-on. But I think that what we've experienced in the last couple of years has actually informed the way in which people are thinking. We saw that the various countries that were represented at the forum are actually undertaking effort to incorporate technology, no longer looking at it as an add-on, but as a part and parcel to the education system. That was one of the key takeaways from the forum. The other thing was that the efforts that were put in place to respond to the COVID, these were emergency efforts. Like the governments are now looking at ways in which turning those efforts into more permanent solutions, turning into policies. And this was really across board. So that was an encouraging observation. There is a renewed consensus that there is a necessity to collaborate across board. That is public-private sector collaboration. The kind of collaboration we saw during the pandemic, can we replicate those collaborations? So this is something that actually came out and something that I thought from the policymakers to the ecosystem players, everybody seemed to be willing to undertake and build those collaboration. And lastly, there was a very interest in addressing the data challenge. The data, that means the education and skill data. And so every single country that was represented at the forum raised their hand that this is a problem they would like to collaborate on. So we're looking forward to actually doing that collaboration. I think one of the things that's really striking is that the Africans have realized that the future of Africa is dependent upon themselves. So they're taking this lead, if you will, in solving their own problems. And this is just generally speaking, but also in education. So there is a need, I think, to build on our will, to build the Africa that we want and the Africa that our children deserve. And so what you're going to see going forward, particularly speaking from the Mastercard Foundation side, as well as the Center for Innovative Teaching and Learning, is that we're going to consolidate everything that we've heard during the forum, because we want to ensure that the attendees realize that we actually are really recipient to their feedback. And we're going to consolidate that and incorporate it into our roadmap. We are going to move forward with some of those items which we shared with them, such as identifying tech hubs that we're going to work with and begin the selection of the EdTech companies that we're going to work together for the next year and a half. We are also going to really start building the data solution that we discussed with ADEA, with the countries that attended the forum. And this is going to address this challenge of collecting, analyzing, and publishing reliable data across Africa. So these are some of the things we're going to undertake in the near future.
Murakoze, asante sana. Thank you very much to Joseph, Suraj, all the teams that worked on this, and to all the ministers, the deputy ministers and delegates who made the Ministerial Forum a great success. This brings us to the end of this special edition of EdTech Monday Africa. But before we wrap up, we had asked you to share your thoughts of how you think we can leverage technology to build resilient education systems. Let's see some of the feedback. Once again, thank you for being with us, and we look forward to seeing you next month once again on EdTech Monday Africa. I'm Julie Gishuru. We'll see you next month.
EdTech Monday Africa was brought to you by the Mastercard Foundation's Center for Innovative Teaching and Learning in ICT and Mastercard Foundation's Young Africa Works.